After more than a year of fighting, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is heading for the United States to meet with President Donald Trump in the White House. This will surely be a critical milestone in the Iron Swords War, one that will have ramifications not only for Stage B of the hostage deal with Hamas, but also for the entire Middle East. The meeting between Netanyahu and Trump is pivotal for the future of this region. Our senior Middle East analyst, Mati Shoshani, will take us deep into what might happen next. In a remarkable development, Saudi Arabia has joined Israel in demanding that Hamas be removed from the Gaza Strip, and meanwhile, in Judea and Samaria, the IDF neutralized a terrorist who was released in the November 2023 hostage release deal. The terrorist, Abed Kamil Makbatia, quickly returned to terror activity, but he won't be doing that anymore, as his terrorist cell ended when he was eliminated in an airstrike as they were on their way to carry out an attack. Meanwhile, the Trump administration has given Lebanon a stark choice: terrorism or economic aid. And of course, there was also an emotional moment over the weekend as Israel welcomed home some more of our precious hostages, and we learned about the harsh conditions that they were held in. And back in the Gaza Strip, and following the hostage release, there are signs of intense anger and disillusionment from the population, which has seen the devastation in the northern sector, which they had been so eager to return to. There is also worry that Hamas will provoke another round of fighting. Hamas is already conducting parades in the ruined streets with armed men chanting and shouting about how they intend to attack Israel once more. The mediator countries have even tried to caution Hamas that this is foolish and will only bring more trouble, but they're ignoring this advice. In addition, Saturday's release of the hostages was another disorganized circus, prompting Israeli anger. Meanwhile, there are questions arising about Hamas's method of hiding the hostages right under the noses of the IDF soldiers. Hamas sources provided details about that terror unit responsible for guarding the hostages, made up of residents of refugee camps and veteran terrorists. This also raises additional concerns about the status of Shiri Bibas and her children, as Yarden's release is bittersweet as he is coming home without his family. And of course, there are also concerns about the release of terrorists under the hostage deal. The IDF is already conveying messages about responding to any provocations and celebrations that were held following the release of the terrorist Zacharia Zubeidi, the most prominent among those freed in this phase. We have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what is happening in Israel on day 485 of the war with Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shiite militias in Iraq, and all the armed groups in Judea and Samaria. All of them are taking their orders from Iran, which is the head of the axis of evil in the Middle East. A moment before we begin, I want to invite you to click that subscribe button if you haven't already, so that you stay tuned to the truth and never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. I also want to tell you about our sponsor for today's video, Vinya. Vinya is a dietary supplement which aids in blood flow and overall health. It's produced right here in the Holy Land. Vinya is a great way to help your body, especially your brain, function at a higher level of efficiency. I'll tell you more about Vinya later in the video, but first, the news. The first stage of the Iron Swords War was the recovery stage, which began on October 7, 2023 and lasted about 3 weeks. After that came the maneuver stage in all sectors, which lasted from October 2023 until very recently, with the declaration of ceasefires in Lebanon and Gaza and the intensification of fighting in Judea and Samaria. The current phase is highlighted by the weekly release of hostages who have been held in captivity for over a year, and on Saturday we saw the release of 3 more: Yarden Bibas, Ofer Calderon, and Kit Sigal. First, Bibas and Calderon were released at the rendezvous point in Khan Yunis in the southern part of the Gaza Strip, and later Kit Sigal was released at the port of Gaza City in the northern strip. Unlike third phase, which showed horrifying scenes of a murderous Gazan mob preventing the smooth transfer of hostage Arbel Yahoud and hostage Gadi Moses to the Red Cross in Khan Yunis, this time the pressure Israel applied worked, and these scenes did not repeat themselves. The Red Cross drove the released hostages to the IDF's Re'im camp, and then, from there, they were flown by IDF helicopters to hospitals in Israel. Alongside the great joy at the return of 3 hostages, Israelis are also deeply concerned about the price we're being forced to pay for this release. 183 terrorists were released yesterday under the ceasefire deal, 9 of them serving life sentences and 54 of them serving long sentences. Also, 111 of the freed prisoners came from the Gaza Strip area and will be released there. Next Saturday, 3 more living hostages are scheduled to be released, and Israel will again have to release terrorists who will likely try to return to terrorist activity. Now, let's talk a little bit about the hostages who were just released. According to reports, Yarden Bibas and Ofer Calderon were given a little bag of goodies upon their release, just like the female hostages who were released in previous rounds. But unlike them, these men were required to sign documents including a declaration that they would not serve in the IDF or the security forces or take part in the war on Palestinians and the slaughter of women and children when they return to Israel. Also, once again, a banner saying in Hebrew, "Zionism will not win" in Hebrew, was hung on the stage where the release ceremony was set up. These vile displays were part of a show that Hamas put on following the chaotic scenes that accompanied the release of Gadi Moses and Agam Berger last Thursday, being forced to walk through an angry crowd of Gazans who screamed at them while heavily armed and masked Hamas terrorists surrounded them. Israel conveyed a warning that it would not tolerate another such incident, and the warning appears to have been heard. The release procedures for Yarden Bibas and Ofer Calderon were relatively short, and after going on stage, receiving gift bags, and forced to wave to the camera, they too were allowed to enter the Red Cross vehicles and were driven to Israel. In the hours following the release, the hostages spoke at length about the conditions of their captivity. Keith said he was held by Hamas terrorists in Gaza City along with other hostages. He stayed in tunnels but was mainly moved around hideout apartments, as he said that the terrorists locked him in an inner room so that he wouldn't be found if someone entered the apartment. In terms of nutrition, Keith said there was a severe shortage of food and he often went long periods of time without eating, including in the day and a half before his release. For many months, Keith did not know what had happened to his son, Shai, who was with him in Kibbutz Kfar Aza on October 7th. He testified that he realized his son was alive after he heard him on the radio. Ofer and Yarden spent time together in the initial days of the captivity. They said that in the first weeks, the terrorists beat them, locked them in cages, and abused them, both physically and mentally. Over the long days in captivity, the two were moved from place to place, underground and in buildings, and stayed with other hostages. The terrorists treated Ofer as if he were an IDF reservist, so he was released wearing a makeshift IDF uniform. Yarden was moved from place to place in Khan Yunis He too stayed in hideout apartments and tunnels, subjected to severe psychological torture, with the terrorists talking to him constantly about his wife Shiri and his children Kfir and Ariel. Although Israeli hostages are being released, and we rejoice to have them back, the outrageous shows that Hamas is putting on are hard to watch. This was particularly difficult to see Yarden Bibas on that stage in Khan Yunis, a father whose wife and children were most likely murdered in captivity and himself held for 484 days. He was forced to wave to the angry crowds shouting at him while he stands there, pale, walking slowly to freedom. A show of lies, of normalcy, so-called, an outrageous show of these terrorists. But it's not only Hamas that has made all of this happen. Millions of people all over the world contributed by putting pressure on their own governments to put pressure on Israel, inciting online and participating in street demonstrations to show support of evil of Hamas terrorists. May the nations of the world look and see a young woman and an elderly man, hostages, passing through the corridor of hell among a brainwashed mob, see a father returning alone in a pickup truck. In the end, for anyone who missed the point, there is another chance after October 7 to understand that these terrorists see Israel's existence as totally unacceptable. This is not about the liberation of the oppressed. This is a religious and ideological battle about whose narrative is legitimate and whose is not. By the way, to this gang of murderous extremists, the existence of moderate Islam is also totally unacceptable. The only vision for the future of life on this planet that they're ready to tolerate is their own. In this context, it is vitally important to remember that one of the reasons they attacked Israel on October 7, 2023 is because they wanted to disrupt the process of normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. This is likely to be one of the first subjects that Netanyahu and Trump take up during their meeting at the White House on Tuesday, and there are good reasons to hope that this normalization deal is back on track. And here at TBN Israel, we'll be keeping a close eye on these developments so we can bring them to you. But in the meantime, it is important to point out to all of these young students at university campuses on the Western world that the freedoms they enjoy are not part of the plan that Hamas and their fellow travelers have for the future of mankind. These students should look at the way Hamas treated these Israeli hostages and realize that they would treat them the same way if they could. Now, speaking of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, there was another development related to the ceasefire deal over the weekend. For the first time since it was closed following the capture by Israel last May, the Rafah border crossing opened at midday on Saturday as part of the ceasefire agreement. Though the crossing, which is operated by Palestinian Authority personnel and the special policing force of the European Union, wounded terrorists are also expected to be evacuated to Egypt, along with additional wounded and sick Palestinians. According to the agreement between Israel and Hamas, 50 wounded Palestinians are supposed to pass through the Rafah Crossing every day, including those designated in the agreement as military personnel, meaning Hamas terrorists. 3 companions will be allowed to live together with each wounded person, so a total of up to about 200 people daily, subject to approvals by the Shin Bet and by Egypt. The agreement includes a clause stating that if Hamas wishes to transfer children beyond that number, it can be done so subject to Israeli approval, and Israel has not objected. The Rafah Crossing, it should be recalled, has for years been described as Gaza's gateway to the world, even before the war, when many weapons were smuggled through it for Hamas. In the first months of the war, it was a central route for bringing in humanitarian aid trucks, but it was closed after being captured by the IDF along with the Philadelphia corridor last May, and Egypt refused to allow it to open as long as Israel was present there. Egypt is trying by all means to prevent the evacuation of Gazans from the Gaza Strip. The regime in Cairo says it's for the benefit of the Gazan population, but it is obvious to everyone that the Egyptians simply don't want Palestinians in their territory. The same thing is happening in Jordan, which is also refusing to take in any more Palestinian refugees and saying it's because they love the Palestinians too much to allow them to move out of their own land. Everyone knows this is a lie, but there are many people and governments who have an interest in pretending that it is not a lie, so the Egyptians and Jordanians have a good chance of getting away with it. But what about Hamas? Though their obvious behavior, staging unnecessary drama around the release of the hostages while telling the people of Gaza, don't worry, we will rebuild the Gaza Strip, Hamas is effectively hijacking the entire civilian population of the Gaza Strip. It has long been obvious that Hamas does not care about these people, but only wants to use them as a propaganda tool against Israel, and now they are putting these people in even a greater danger. The good news is that Hamas might not get away with it this time. There are growing voices in Western countries and even in the Arab world, including in Saudi Arabia, rising up to criticize Hamas and demand that it be held accountable for its outrageous behavior. There is also growing criticism of Hamas for ignoring the advice of the mediators from Qatar, Egypt, and the United States to avoid making these big dramatic displays while releasing the Israeli hostages. That brings us to TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst, Mati Shoshani, who will give us some analysis of recent events in the Gaza Strip, as well as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's upcoming trip to Washington to meet with President Donald Trump at the White House. But the moment before we do that, I want to invite you to help us spread the truth by sharing our videos on YouTube, following us on social media, and most importantly, click that subscribe button so that you stay tuned to the truth in real time.
That is a great question, Yair. As Prime Minister Netanyahu prepares to travel to meet with President Donald Trump, the thing that's going to be on the table more than almost anything else is the question of Iran. Now let's break that down. There are a couple components to this story. Over the last 15 months, Iran has done almost everything in its power to destabilize the region. And on almost every front, it has lost against Israel and its allies, specifically the US-led coalition. They've lost Hamas power, they've lost Hezbollah power, they've lost their foothold in Syria, much of their regional influence in Iraq, as we discussed last week, and now we're talking about a head-to-head battle between the Iranians and Israeli and American influence in this region. And the biggest question on the table, unlike the last couple months, is not the proxy warfare, but rather the Iranian nuclear program. Now let's explain this. The Iranians for multiple decades have been pushing towards a nuclear bomb. They want to be a regional superpower, and they'll do almost anything in their reach to get that. And the bomb, for them, is almost the holy grail of how to become and maintain their regional influence. As far as the state of Israel is considered, almost everything is on the table to prevent the Iranians from reaching that capability. And over the last, it's more than a decade at this point, Israel, the US, and many other countries have done a lot to stop the Iranian nuclear program. More so, the previous Trump administration was very strong in imposing financial sanctions on the Iranian government. Now, the Iranians are clever and they've been able to circumvent much of those sanctions, but not all of them. The toll of the sanctions on the Iranian economy is very heavy, and they're looking to reduce that toll. Now, something interesting is happening right now. The previous Trump administration didn't have the nuclear option on the table. They talked about it, but it wasn't really an option. But now, after more than 15 months of warfare between Israel and the Iranians, the thought of using weapons, as in bombing directly the Iranian facilities, is on the table. And the Iranians are taking note of that change. How does it look? Just recently, the Iranian foreign minister made public threats against Israel and the US, stating that if either country directly attacks the nuclear facilities of the country, they would retaliate strongly and destabilize the region to a degree that was not seen before. But what does that even look like? I mean, if you think about it, The Iranians have been doing everything in their power to destabilize the region for decades at this point. They've been the fosters of Hamas, of Hezbollah. They've funded and equipped the Houthis. They've sent their IRGC speedboats to kidnap ships within the Arabian and the Red Sea. They've done a lot to destabilize the region. So this statement of never before seen actions seems a little vague and honestly an empty threat to me. What I believe they're doing is they're positioning themselves to an upcoming negotiation with the US government. And why are they doing that? The sanction toll on the Iranians has been very, very heavy. But that's not all. The question of whether or not there will be a military attack is on the table now more than it's been ever before. And why is that? If you look at the footprint of the Iranian government, and specifically the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps in the region, their impact is weakened in this region. They've lost their foothold both within Israel and also in the countries surrounding us. Much of their Ring of Fire doctrine has been weakened to a degree that countries are speaking against the Iranians for the first time almost ever. The Iranians know they've lost a lot of power. The US and Israel know that now more than ever is the time to strike Iran and try to stop their nuclear program. More so, there seems to be a willingness in the Trump administration to go hard on the Iranians more than ever before. There's internal political support within the US on both parties to go hard against the Iranians and resolve the issue of the Iranian nuclear threat. The thought of having Iran, a country that is led by fundamentalist Islamic thought and doctrine, having nuclear capability is something that no country in the world should accept. And I believe that now is the time that both Israel and the US see an opportunity to strike hard within Iran, possibly using military assets to do so and not just financial sanctions to really change the equation. There's another question here. What will the countries of the world do faced with the question of an Iranian nuclear capability? Now, Israel is clear on that, and so is the US, but other countries should join in the effort to stop any push towards an Iranian nuclear bomb. And there's a question here that's much bigger than just Iranian involvement of whether or not other countries such as Iran, which are irrational players in the international arena, should be allowed to get nuclear capabilities. Think about this. How can someone operate in the Middle East? How can ships move through the seas? How can other countries operate freely? What will Saudi think? What will the Emiratis think if the Iranians have a nuclear bomb? Their response will be swift. They will want exactly the same thing, or guarantees of another country, such as the US, that they will protect them in the case of any Iranian attack. So you understand, Iran having a nuclear capability is something that, by its nature, destabilizes the entire region. The last and one of the biggest pieces in the puzzle is Saudi Arabia and its involvement in this region. So just a bit of history here. Saudi was on the brink of making some kind of agreement with Israel, or normalization between Israel, the US, and other countries in sort of the nature or the spirit of the Abraham Accords before the October 7th, 2023 war broke out. And now we're back at that place. Saudi wants to guarantee its stake and its position in the Arab world and in the Middle East. At the same time, it wants to make sure that the Iranians are pushed back and weakened, and they need the US and Israeli support to do so, specifically when it comes to Air Force capabilities. And then the last piece is the Saudis have been speaking up against Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And that's really interesting, so let's delay on that for a second. The Saudis, who are one of the biggest leaders in the Muslim world, or the Arab world, or both of them at the same time, have been publicly calling for Hamas to be fully removed from the Gaza Strip. Now, why would they do that? The reason is they actually want stability in this region. They want to be a voice that is listened to and heard, and a power of influence in stabilizing this region. But they also want to guarantee that whatever axis of powers that they join forces with is actually able to bring a time of peace and comfort to this region. And Hamas is the exact opposite of that. Saudi, and Israel of course does this all the time, are saying that the Gaza Strip cannot go back to life as usual under Hamas leadership. And part of a permanent solution should be Hamas's full removal. One more interesting thing is the Saudis are waiting to normalize relationships with Israel. And there's one big piece that they need to be able to do that, and they've been very clear about it. What they want is also to normalize the relationship between Israel and the Palestinians. As leaders and a strong voice in the Muslim world, the Saudis can't move forward without Israel having a permanent agreement with the Palestinian Authority. And I believe that this is the way, through Saudi, through U.S. influence under President Trump to stabilize everything that's happening in this region, push back the Iranians, possibly even attack them or eliminate their nuclear capabilities to bring a season of stability, peace, and prosperity through relationships that we have not seen before. So let's hope that that is the future that the Middle East carries, and not one of Iranian influence or Iranian nuclear capabilities. Now back to you, Yair.
Thank you very much, Mati Shoshani. We will continue to report on every development in this matter. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to thank again the brave soldiers and the security forces who continue fighting to keep Israel safe and work tirelessly to bring our hostages back home. This past year, during my reserve service, I witnessed firsthand the sacrifices that these recruits make, some of them even in their 30s and 40s, serving more than 200 days every year. It's an incredible commitment, but it's also a heavy burden, both emotionally and physically. For me, faith was my anchor. Praying every day gave me the strength to push forward, but I also found the practical boost in Vinya. This is an incredible Israeli innovation made from red grape cells. Vinya enhances blood flow to your heart, brain, and muscles, helping you feel more energetic, focused, and ready to take on the day. It's a natural way to support your body without the sugar or alcohol found in grapes. What's more, Vinya isn't just capsules. You can enjoy it as coffee or tea each morning, giving you a fresh, healthy start to your day. I used it daily during my service, and I still do. If you want to feel the difference for yourself, visit www.vinya.tbnisrael.com or call 800-638-1944. Trust me, you won't regret it. Now, let's get back to the news. Switching our focus now to the latest development in Judea and Samaria. On Saturday, an IDF drone conducted a strike on two groups of armed terrorists in the area of Jenin refugee camp. Later, the IDF announced that an Air Force aircraft guided by the Shin Bet struck a vehicle carrying terrorists in Kabatia, south of Jenin. The strikes were carried out as part of the IDF's Operation Iron Wall in northern Samaria. In the context of this operation, on Thursday, Sergeant Major Liam Chazi, age 20, from the Haruv Reconnaissance Unit, was killed in action during a clash with terrorists in the Jenin refugee camp. In the same incident, another soldier was seriously wounded and 4 more were lightly to moderately wounded. A large quantity of weapons and ammunition have also been captured, along with explosive devices. Dozens of buildings used for terror activity in the camp have also been demolished. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development in the Judea and Samaria sector. So stay tuned to the truth about what is happening in Israel and help us by sharing our videos on YouTube, following us on social media, and it's very important for us to have your support. So if you want to help us create more videos, please consider making a financial donation on the donate button in YouTube. Just press on it or visit our website at tbnisrael.com/give. Returning to the hostage deal for those who are held in Gaza by the hands of Hamas, despite the difficulties and obstacles, the hostage deal is holding up, and it appears that Hamas has a clear interest in continuing it at least until day 42, the last day of the first phase. After Saturday's release of Kit Siegel, Ofer Calderon, and Yarden Bibas, the number of hostages returned to Israel under the deal rose to 18, which also includes the 5 Thai hostages who were returned on Thursday. Currently, 79 hostages remain in Gaza, 1/3 of all 251 hostages who were taken to the Gaza Strip on October 7 of 2023. 35 of them are believed to have died in captivity. Under the first phase of the deal, which was determined to include the return of 33 Israelis, another 20 civilians are expected to be returned to Israel, among them 3 remaining members of the Bibas family still in Gaza, the mother, Shiri, and the children, Ariel and Kfir, for whom the IDF emphasized there is deep concern for their lives. In addition, 7 men categorized as over the age of 50 and 85 are still expected to be freed, and 10 hostages defined as sick or wounded. 4 phases remain to the first stage of the deal. 3 phases, in each of which 3 hostages will be returned, and a 4th phase on the final day of this deal, day 42, where 11 will be released, including Hisham El-Sayed and Avera Mengistu. In a statement published Saturday evening, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that in the last 2 weeks we succeeded in releasing 13 of our hostages plus 5 Thai citizens who were also held by Hamas. At this time, all our thoughts are with Shiri, Ariel, and Kfir Bibas. They are on our minds, and so are all our hostages, both living and deceased, who have not yet returned home to Israel. We will continue to act decisively to bring them home and achieve all the objectives of this war. So please, keep praying for the truth, share, and follow us, and pray hard for our hostages to return home soon in peace and health. Pray for our IDF soldiers wherever they are, in the Gaza Strip, in Lebanon, in Syria, or in Judea and Samaria. And most importantly, don't forget to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And together, we will win this war because God is on our side.